Sean Aney here with RealAgriculture.com and RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, of course, on Sirius XM. Well, there's a lot of historic tractors that everybody has a fondness for. And everybody has a brand and a color that they're really, really particular to. One of those brands is the Farmall tractor. And there's a new book out that really captures the history of the Farmall tractor that many of you are familiar with. The book is entitled Farmall Century, and we are joined right now by the author of that book that is just out freshly here this past October. It is Lee Klancher. Lee, great to chat with you.
Great to be on, Sean. Always good to talk about my book.
Yeah, well, hey, congratulations on the book. I know that you've been very successful in copies ordered, and this is really cool because you know, when I actually heard you first on RFT TV talking about the book. What is it about the Farmall tractor that made you write the book in the first place?
Oh my. I mean, you know, really the Farmall tractor is one of the most significant tractors of the 20th century, arguably the most. So that certainly was the starting point. But this anniversary was also a chance for us to put a bookend. We've got 3 other books that sort of cover the history of IH and Case IH equipment up until the modern day from about 57. And we hadn't really done the early stuff. So we started with the modern stuff because that was where the hole in the market is. But this is now the 4th volume. We sort of completed our set of telling the history of these machines from, you know, basically the 1880s up until today.
So what is it about the Farmall tractor that made it, as you described, one of the most significant tractors of the last 100 years?
You know, it's shockingly simple, but it was a big deal back then. It was the first tractor that could plow, turn a belt, and cultivate. And so it was just the tall back wheels in the back and the tricycle in the front that allowed the tractor to go down the row and cultivate. But prior to that time, no small tractor, well, no tractor, period, could do all those 3 things. So it always meant that you were either buying this heavy, expensive thing to plow with, and then these weird little things called motor cultivators, which really didn't work to cultivate. This was a machine that could do all 3, and all of a sudden you're like, all right, I can buy that, and I'm good. I can take my horses and use them less, or, you know, eventually replace them.
Yeah, what were the horsepower ranges?
These were 1020s, so they were, and interestingly, IH did not rate horsepower for these, and this started a whole thing they carried through the letter series where they said it's a 2-plow tractor. They didn't want to put numbers on it, but really? It made about 20 horsepower at the drawbar and 10 horsepower at the, I'm sorry, 20 at the belt, 10 at the drawbar.
Okay, and based on the significance and its uniqueness, any idea, like at the height, what the market share was in this tractor range? Like how big of it, like how big
how dominant were they?
Yeah.
Those numbers are on the books because we looked at it, and it's not as simple as you'd think. Once they buried the Fordson, so you have to remember that the Fordson came out, and the Fordson upended everything, right? And Fordson had, I think, 40 to 50% of the market for a while. It might have even been more of that. IH, once they got the Fordson out, IH was in the 40 to 50% range. Now, that would slide over the years. The competition stiffened up, but they had a very high share for a while. Now, it wasn't just the Farmall, obviously. The McCormick Deering 1020, they sold a lot of those. And they had another line of tractors that sold pretty well, but they really dominated for a while. But the big thing was the significance of it. Once that thing came out, everybody was scrambling to have something competitive.
Very, very, very cool. And I guess technically, correct me if I'm wrong here, my understanding is the Farmall is still made today.
The brand lives on.
Okay,
yes.
Okay, that's a good way to put it. Okay.
The brand lives on. The brand went away for a while. So, and International Harvester was fascinating with brands. When they were formed by 5 major companies in 1902. They kept all 5 brands. And in fact, there was probably at least a dozen brands within those 5 companies, and they were very independent. So that company to this day has a lot of brands. Today, there's Steiger, there's Case IH, there's Magnum, there's a number of things. So in the 70s, they sort of phased Farmall out. Farmall moved, Farmall was the primary brand for their agriculture cultivating tractors for quite a few years. And then they started putting it on faceplates, and there'd be a Farmall version that was for cultivating, and an international that was more of a plow tractor. Yeah. And then in the mid 70s, Farmall sort of slipped out of the wayside, and the actual date is kind of fuzzy. In the 2000 era, they brought it back. I think it was 2003, and they put it on their line of compact tractors. And today those tractors, first they were very, very small. They've gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. I think they go up to 180, 170 horsepower, somewhere in that range today. So Farmall does live on, but it was the premier brand in 1922 and in 1950, and then it sort of changed over the years.
I would have to imagine, and you've done, like you said, there's numerous. You've been doing a lot of work on the Case IH brands of tractors. I would imagine that you get some because farmers they have I always find they have stories about their tractors, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's always, it's so funny you brought up that tractor, that model, because I remember my dad. There's always stories, or my grandpa, or those kinds of things. For me, it's I could think of tractor having around the John Deere 4020, and my grandpa. Those two things are kind of attached. So I imagine you've had some great stories come out. People that have bought your books in the past, and including this one, and shared some stories with you. It's just funny how emotionally attached we are to certain models of tractors.
There are, and there's really two things. I'd say when we did the first red tractors, one of the things we did was put every single model. There's a lot of books had been done on IH, and they always sort of had a smattering. We had, I think, 750 models we identified that was models and variants, so that you could open that book and find Grandpa's tractor. And when I took the book, I literally had, you get advance copies from the press early. And I was out on some shoots, and I had a couple. And I just started showing people. And they would page through, find the family tractor, and tell me a story. And when that happened, and I saw it, I was like, I think I was right. I think this is going to be a hit. And it was. That book now has 100,000 copies in print in all editions. It's very successful. But the other thing that's really amazing is how the stories of how the machines came to be sort of evolved because you get the book out there. So you get the book out there, and in one of the books, we had this wonderful story of Bud Ewell, who was a IH salesperson, high-end sales exec, and very flashy, very colorful, fantastic storyteller. If he walked into a room, he blew the room up with his personality. Just amazing, amazing guy, amazing sales guy. Well, Bud heard that there was a new Deere coming out. And it was going to be introduced at the Superdome. I think it was the 55 series. I know it was in the early 1980s. So yep. Bud goes and finds himself a John Deere shirt and a John Deere hat, sneaks into the Superdome, and then watches, and there's a bar at the top, and he goes to the bar in his story and watches the proceedings until the Deere guys figure it out, send somebody up, and throw him out. Well, in the course of, we told that story, and that story was very popular, both in blogs and the book and everything, and very entertaining. Bud's, but John Deere, a guy from John Deere, said, I was there that day. And I've got a little bit different version of that story. And he told us the other side. And those that knew Bud and loved him, Bud loved a good story. And Bud had no problem, bending things just a little bit. He was there. That was all true. He's wearing a John Deere cap. But there was some details. So in the John Deere book, we put the other guy's story. But there's a lot of that where a story will come out, and then somebody will say, well, this was my experience, a little bit different. And the history just gets richer because of what's out there. It's really fun.
Yeah, and I think in today's world where I think people are, well, there's a certain section of the farm community where they're trading more often, and they don't get as emotionally attached to models as maybe we did in an earlier time. But for you, this is the fourth book you've done on Case IH. What's your attachment or your personal story that has you so interested in this brand of tractor?
what got me here was really my grandfather. And I'll tell you why. I grew up on a farm, but I was a teacher's kid, and it was a working farm, so I was around farms and equipment. And I loved machines. Particularly motorcycles and cars, anything fast I liked. But tractors to me were always, machines I was around. I got an assignment to go take pictures of Farmall tractors when I was in my 20s. I just got out of college. And I was taking a shot of an old Farmall. I think it was I don't remember, it was old Farmall. And I got close, and the smell reminded me of my grandfather. My grandfather was a farmer. He always had the latest equipment. He was a machine head and innovator. And he and I really had a special connection. My dad really didn't care about cars and machines. He wanted to play baseball, but Grandpa did, and he and I are really connected on that. So that was kind of the personal connection. And then the more I researched this history and the more I learned about tractors, and I learned how much they've changed our society. I mean, if you're studying agriculture technology, you're really studying the evolution, of our society, the really rapid changes we've all experienced and that came before us. And that machine was a big piece of that. And so I really, really fell in love with that. I'm also a photographer, and outdoor photography is really, really where I cut my teeth there, and travel photography, and shooting farm tractors. You're outdoors most of the time. Now I've started doing some indoor crazy stuff with lighting, but I still love, being out there in the morning when the sun comes up and shooting that picture. It just a lot of the things that I love kind of came together. So, my story isn't traditional. I didn't grow up. I certainly grew up on tractors, but it wasn't that connection a lot of our readers have, which is from their butt in the machine. But it's a very deep connection nonetheless, and a history that I really love getting the privilege to chronicle.
Yeah, you mentioned that tractor seat. That's one thing that's gotten a lot more comfortable than some of those early Farmalls, is the kind of seat that people are sitting in today. And guess what? There's also a cab nowadays. All those comforts, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Lee, thanks so much for joining us. Congratulations again on the book. If somebody wants to order a copy, Lee, how do they do so? Where do they find it?
You can find the Farmall Century anywhere books are sold. You also can find it at your local Case IH dealership. A lot of them carry them. And go to our website, octanepress.com. We always have it, and we've got a lot of great other things that you can read and learn about if that's your thing.
Yeah, and it's not just a written book. There's a lot of pictures in the book, right?
Yes, the book is a big coffee table book, and the photography in particular is worth mention. For this, there was a lot of Farm Security Administration photographers, Dorothea Lange and others like that, really famous, some of the best photographers really in the 20th century, who chronicled what was going on the farm, and they photographed a lot of farmalls. We dug up a lot of those images. Those images are just absolutely spectacular. They take you back to a different time. So yes, it's a very visual work. You can read it. I give you a lot to read, yep. But it's a big, beautiful work to look at.
Seems like a pretty good Christmas present for that farmer in your life, if you ask me. Lee, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it, and congratulations on the book, Farmall Century.
Thanks so much, Sean. Always a pleasure.